Thank you, David. Our next speaker comes from Queensland. Please welcome Kate Stewart.
Thank you, Peter, for inviting me here today. Flag SA, distinguished guests, and the most important people, all you farmers. You're here. Have you ever noticed the word transparency? It's used frequently by bureaucrats and many of our elected MPs. Do you think that Julia Gillard has been transparent? Do you think the Greens have been transparent?
No!
How many of you are aware that Senator Leanne Rhiannon has a very long history with the Communist Party?
Yes. That'll be right.
One. Anybody else? Come on, show me.
Everyone should know that.
The back row always knows, but yeah, there was 3 hands out here. She is very active. One must wonder why her portfolio is democracy. What would a communist know about democracy? Or someone with very strong communist affiliations? The only logical conclusion I can come up with, and this is just a hypothetical, is to dismantle it. Now that is over. I'm not going to stand here in a skirt, in this poncho. I'm going to show you who I am.
Too cold. More! More! You can do better! Playing the full Monty shot.
I'm back! My name is Kate Stewart. I am of the land. I am a wife, a mother, a grandmother to the 8th generation on the land. I want you people to stand with me across Australia. I want the farmers united. Can you fight for your rights for your land?
Yes!
I mean it. I'll come back again if you don't. Righto. How many of you out here, I want to know, how many of you out here are first generation on the land? Put your hands up. I need to see. Can we do a count? Hold them high. Okay, second generation. One. Third.
Yes, sir.
Fourth. Oh, that's better. Fifth.
Yeah. Oh, yes, sir.
Sixth.
Sixth. Yeah, I'm sixth.
Seventh. We're out. We're out. We're out. 3 to 4% of Australian privately held land, according to the Bureau of Statistics, is only held by generational farmers. We are a dying breed. That is the reality. Today you are among a very privileged part of Australian history, but I want to make it now a legacy to go forward. Today I will endeavour to give you an insight into my family's nightmare. It started in 1999 and ended in 2003. This is a personal, very personal story for me. I will do this by means of a letter written by one of our children, asking the New South Wales State Parliament to listen to her for help. Our child at that stage was 17 years of age, and there was a Green in the chamber that laughed at my child's plea. Senator Leanne Rhiannon, I know it was you. I have the Hansard. Also, I will get to other people's opinions and facts on what they witnessed happen to our family. Let us begin. However, I am going to start at the end of what happened to us, like a book. For all you men, I want you to put yourself in the role of my husband at that time. Think very carefully. For all you women, you think you are me. You listen to this. Come on, old mate. As Mark gently led the gelding away from the stables, he thought of the life that the old fellow had lived. A Khan was a beautiful natured horse, not a vicious bone in his body, lived through bushfires, drought, to a ripe old age of 31 years. He was still in good health for his age, but he could not and would not survive the trip to his new home in Queensland. A Khan, like us, his human family, could not survive the green laws in New South Wales. He should have been able to live out his natural life, but that was not to be. As the rifle Mark lifted somehow became unbearably heavy, the old man, a Khan, lowered his head level with the barrel. He knew what Mark had to do and did not fidget. He somehow accepted the inevitable. I'm sorry, old mate. We tried and we failed you too. And with that, a loud gunshot rang out, echoing around the surrounding hills like church bells at a funeral. It was a Khan's funeral. Damn the national parks, damn Bob Carr, damn the Colong Foundation and Keith Muir to hell, roared my husband, firing rounds into the air as a display of defiance. Mark was not alone though. While I was now safe in Queensland, two very good friends were with him, Patty and Noel, waiting on the other side of the sheds. Noel walked around to where Mark was, with the Khan's carcass lifeless on the ground. Silently, Mark started to pile stones on our old mate. Noel quietly and respectfully did the same, one stone after another, until he was covered. Patty was so distressed that she could not do this. It was too traumatic for our dear friends as well. They rang me and said it was a gut-wrenching experience for them to see this. The tears in not only Mark's eyes, but in their eyes as well. Soul-destroying. But for what? What reason? For the good of the environment. They will never forget this experience. It has changed their lives forever, and ours. How did it come to this? The loss of a home, almost total destruction of my family, loss of our land. How did this all start? Here is my story through bloodshot eyes at my keyboard for you. Pull me up if I go over time. The first property that we purchased was in 1999, November 1999. Before we purchased the property, we conducted all relevant title searches. Among those was the right to convert perpetual lease to freehold. We could. Our searches showed that the settlement lease could be converted to freehold, with the lease having been assessed in due course. Letter dated there, the 28th of October before purchase. Our searches also showed that another lease on it. Again, this lease can be converted to purchase. The files indicate that the matter has already been referred to National Parks and they have expressed no interest in the property. We also had the vendors complete a standard requisition of title when you're asked, is there any interest by National Parks as well? We were specifically asking for National Parks because they were a boundary. Thank you. And we also asked about SEP 46, which is a native vegetation thing. So, you know, all the normal things you go through with acquiring a property. During the mid to late 2000, an application Department of Land and Water Conservation Regional Office was lodged. This was separate. This was also, because we bought the property, everything was fine. We could convert to freehold. We lodged this permit application to clear native vegetation. That was fine. We were granted permit to do that, not a problem. It was approximately 313 hectares of native vegetation. Didn't have a problem there. So that was granted in January in 2001. The second property that we bought was purchased on the 18th of September in 2000. Before we purchased that property, again, we were very thorough. We conducted all the relevant title searches. Among those was the right to convert perpetual lease to freehold. Had the vendors on that thing do the same, requisition on title. There was no interest by National Parks and Wildlife Service that the vendor was aware of. In addition, no breaches of native vegetation. And this was all completed prior to the property acquisition. At this time, the vendors verbally told us that they had offered their property to National Parks. However, National Parks did not have an interest on each occasion. The vendors of the property provided us with documentation dated on the 8th of May in 2000, stating that indeed portion 14, consisting of 3,825 acres, could be converted to freehold tenure. This is well before we purchased the property. In fact, the vendors had actually been to National Parks in that month and asked them again, were they interested in buying the property, and they said no. This was important as we were farm forestry and a beef cattle enterprise. We were diversifying, as that's what people on the land do, you all know that, to help drought-proof ourselves, and the right to freehold was a major factor in this. We purchased the property with a very real estoppel, as indicated from Department of Land and Water Conservation in writing that we could convert to freehold. 27th of December, we lodged an application to convert both properties. We were given a payout figure from the government departments of approximately $8,000. In June 2001, our phone rang one evening. It was a representative from National Parks and Wildlife Service asking if we would be home tomorrow. It was a matter that he could not discuss over the phone. It had to be done face to face. When he arrived the next day, the representative sat in our home and told us that our recently purchased property had been nominated for a wilderness assessment. We had no idea what that meant. When we asked the property, when was the property affected or nominated, we were told that the nomination had been placed on the property in the January-February of 2000, 9 months before we purchased it. Who lied? Was there an interest from National Parks? No. National Parks said no. The vendors said no. Who lied? The previous owners had not been informed of this. We asked them if they knew anything. They reassured us no, they didn't. It is my understanding that the Wilderness Act of 1987, then Premier Carr gave directive to his council that evoked that this legislation is exempt from being shown up on title searches. It's deliberately deceptive to you. And that further, no permission from landowners is required. Ripper! What they do, we asked the National Parks what this meant over our land, what would this mean for us, and he said, oh, it's going to enhance the property value of your, enhance the property value, and it's an acknowledgement of the unique qualities of your property that you now owned. We were told about the process on the property, what would happen. We as the current owners did not have the right to decline the assessment. The assessment process takes in, among other criteria, native vegetation, threatened species, flora, fauna, ecological communities, the capacity to return to wilderness, heritage values, Aboriginal heritage, European heritage, just to name a few laws and legislation. However, we could deny staff physical access. The assessment would still be completed by other means, meaning desktop. Now, after hearing what Property Rights Australia President just said, we know how accurate they are in Queensland and certainly New South Wales. I don't know how accurate they are here in South Australia, but their software doesn't work very well. Once the assessment was completed and compiled, all of the information would be put on a public display period for 3 months. Comments from the public are then encouraged on your privately owned land to decide if the property meets wilderness criteria. All relevant organisation, that means conservationists, that's code, would then be asked to send in submissions and comment on your privately owned and held land. The owners, us, then are sent a copy of the final outcome of the assessment, and if we were assessed as meeting the wilderness status, we would be bestowed the privilege of being able to accept or decline that declaration. If we declined the title of meeting the wilderness declaration as explained, it would then be on the National Parks and Wildlife Service register for perpetuity. If we accepted, then we would have the privilege of fencing off the area, not being able to graze it. We still had to pay rates on it. We had to allow public access on it, on our public liability, not the government's. We had to control the feral animals and noxious weeds at our expense. What a privilege. We agreed to let National Parks and Wildlife staff enter the property. We really did not have a choice, did we? Our legal advice told us to comply fully, as we always have. We are law-abiding citizens. We could not stop this public devaluing of our land by putting our private land on display for every extreme conservationist to comment on, if they wanted to. At the time, there were a total of 29 other landowners in the area. You're always singled out with these things. Who were affected by this dangerous legislation that took away our rights to have the legislation that took away our rights to have any assessments conducted on our land. Freehold land was no exception. This is all encompassing this legislation. Sorry, I've just lost my place in my notes. On the 16th of January in 2002, we were notified, even though that we had documentation, proven documentation saying that we could convert to freehold, our submission, our money, our outlays of $8,000, was then refunded to us minus a fee for holding it, because we weren't allowed to convert to freehold now because National Parks and Wildlife Service had an interest in our property. They knew they did before we bought the property, but the state government still said, here, pay us $8,000, you can go and convert to freehold. So that impacted on our business dreadfully as well. If you think that the debacle stops here, that's the history of the properties and what happened and with this wilderness assessment. Now here comes the dangerous part again, and this is for your families. You need to be aware of this. This can happen anytime, anywhere. The wilderness nomination was only the beginning of a terrifying experience financially, physically and emotionally. We then asked National Parks to rescind its decision to have this wilderness assessment on our land. We asked that we should be permitted to convert to freehold tenure based on the expectations of the property. We decided to go public with what had happened to our properties along with the other landowners. All the while the drought was getting worse. Contact was made with the group organised by New South Wales farmers at that point in time, so we actually got to meet some of the other farmers and landowners that were affected. As a result of this, I was asked to represent the Country Women's Association for New South Wales on the Brigalow Belt South Bioregional Assessment, which takes in natural resources and all manner of things. I saw some dreadful things. Also rallies in Narrabri, Gunnedah. What this did was also attract a very unsavoury element into our communities, these wilderness assessments, because they'd all been sent out, look, comment on this place here and this place here. This unsavoury element was coming into our communities. They could easily identify where we lived. They could identify our homes, our children, our husbands, our wives. They knew who we were. If you speak out publicly, this is what happens to you. And I'll be honest with you right now, I am absolutely packing it, standing here today before you. This is the third time in over a decade that I've done this. I went to Perth and gave evidence for the native vegetation thing. Our family's submission is confidential, never to be released. Okay, this is not a game, ladies and gentlemen. Do not think this is a game. This is deadly serious. My husband was cutting timber to fill the timber order because we were farm forestry, when he noticed the tree starting to pirouette while he had his chainsaw in the tree. Anyway, he sort of looked up and thought, what the hell? And he ran back. There was a black Jet Bell helicopter hovering over him. We'd been warned not to cut any more trees down, and it was hovering over him. He had to run for his life. That's just not the one-off. We have 4 children. 2 younger girls were riding their horses. This helicopter came down over the hills, round the creek, over the top of my girls. They saw my girls on the helicopter, from the helicopter. They saw them. They were in the clearing. They flew directly over the top of them. My youngest daughter at that time was dragged on her horse. This is deliberate. Have no illusion. My son, who was 5, we were standing in our house. I could hear this noise outside and I thought, what is that noise? It was the helicopter had come down outside our house, hovering over our dog kennels. My son, who was 5, was screaming, running down the hall saying, "Mummy, Mummy, it's back, the black helicopter's back." My neighbours would ring me and say, "Kate, it's coming over Bibble Creek. Kate, it's coming down the road. Kate, it's coming over our place." This helicopter did the same thing to them. People would try and take photographs. Their neighbours would try and take photographs. The ID numbers on these helicopters are covered up. There are too many witnesses to this. Too many good witnesses who are scared to death. They gave their statements. The government has their statements. They haven't acted. We told National Parks each time, my husband told National Parks each time it was happening, so it was recorded with them. We did not tell the police. We were told on the phone. There was always these phone calls, threatening phone calls coming in, always between sort of 3 o'clock and, or 3:30 and about 5, quarter to 5 in the afternoon after I pick my kids up from school. If you don't stop cutting timber down, you know, we're going to burn you out in the middle of the night and your 4 young ones. Our eldest daughter was away at school. 2 people approached her wearing World Wildlife Fund t-shirts. I'm not saying that they are from World Wildlife Fund. You can put a t-shirt on from anywhere, but told her to, singled her out down the shopping centre and said, "Tell your mother to shut up or there's going to be repercussions." This is Australia, isn't it?
Well,
are you people shocked at what you're hearing?
Everyone must listen to this because it's going to happen here. It's going to happen here. Listen, don't put your head in the sands. Listen to this.
Thank you, because this is really hard for me. So while all these threats were coming in, 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. You've already got the ending. You know how it ended, so I got that out first. Okay, while these threats were coming in, we now had undergone the wilderness assessment, still asking the department to clarify the deceitful positions. In the end, we had to put in writing and offer our properties to National Parks and Wildlife Service to buy us out. They had a state valuer and we had our own valuer that they paid for. We weren't told, we didn't know, because this is over years of abuse, we weren't told that we were entitled to just terms compensation. One government employee overheard another government employee talking about, "We will have the Stewart's property at all costs." They weren't talking financial. We had our timber valued and it was in excess of 2.4 million, somewhere between 2.4 and 2.5 million dollars. The directive was given to ignore that figure. We were not compensated. I think you get the point of what's happened to me, hey? Stay strong, South Australia, because I need you. My kids need you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I think the message from Kate is don't let this happen in South Australia. Our next speaker is, we have 2 speakers from Western Australia, Narrogin in Western Australia, Mark and Janet Thompson.
Thank you. I know these stories can get a bit heavy and I'm sorry about that. Because of our story, which I'm here to tell, we have been contacted by other people, and the crux of our story has been going for about 4 years now. But if you really want to spend time watching YouTubes, you find these stories of real Australians that have been put on by guys like this down here that have asked questions, and you find those YouTubes and you listen. These types of stories are all around this country, and I do believe they're all around the Western world, as somebody said earlier. We immigrated from the United States to Western Australia after purchasing land in 2001 for the sole purpose of building a beef cattle feedlot south of the regional town of Narrogin, 2.25 hours inland from Perth. We came with our own life savings in search of golden soil and wealth for toil, and we found it in spades. There was an opportunity in the wheat belt of Western Australia, and we came to live. We and our 4 young children, 3 of whom were born in the Narrogin Hospital, are now Australian citizens. We took much care and spent significant time in developing the site-specific feedlot project from an environmental, an animal welfare, and a financial perspective. Upon submitting the detailed plans to the relevant authorities, we were on hold over a year getting approvals. We were finally granted permission to construct a 15,000 head feedlot on the site we proposed. A small group of people opposed our development from the beginning, and 2 appeals were lodged against our original works approval. There is a 12,000 head piggery directly adjacent to our property, which had been there for 20 years, and about which this same group had complained bitterly prior to our purchase. The first post went into the ground of February 2003, and the first cattle went on feed in June of that year. Complaints, usually based on odor, against our facility were made almost from the beginning. As president of the WA Lot Feeders Association, Matt attended a meeting in May of 2007 between environmental departments, environmental groups, and industry to discuss transitioning the National Pollutant Inventory, or NPI, system to the National Environmental Protection Measures, or NEPM, system, and including so-called greenhouse gas emissions in the required reporting regime. At this meeting, Matt questioned the number that members of the feedlotting industry were forced to use in our calculation of pollution under NPI. In our case, it was ammonia. The figures supplied to our industry for calculations and reporting were physiologically impossible. It meant that our cattle were emitting more nitrogen than they were taking in. The officials could give no answer. Then Matt proposed to oppose inclusion of greenhouse gases in the new reporting, stating that in his opinion, they did not meet the definition of pollution. The industry people at the meeting were very interested in what Matt had to say and gathered around him to take copies of the Great Global Warming Swindle DVD and Lavoisier Group material that he handed out. Soon after this, the Department of Environment and Conservation appeared to increase their reliance upon complaints against our business, and correspondence with DEC increased dramatically. Also after the May meeting, the Environmental Defender's Office, or EDO, a state and federally funded not-for-profit organization, got involved with the small group of local complainants. The handful of complainants incorporated into the Narrogin Environmental Action Team, and they learned how to, in general, gum up the works so that our project would die on the vine before coming to fruition. At this point, we had built to 10,000 head of our approved 15,000 head development. DEC's actions worried us enough to cause us to stop further investment. The vast majority of local people are highly supportive, or at least ambivalent, about our business being in Narrogin. There is a high degree of attention given our development, but mostly from people that are interested in economic activity and ensuring that our community grows and thrives, with real productive businesses being a base for local sustainability. In early 2008, we hired attorneys in Perth because it had become apparent that a positive outcome was not going to be forthcoming with the Department of Environment. After getting up to speed on our case, the solicitor and barrister suggested that we meet with Dr. Johannes Schumby, an environmental attorney. After some resistance, we agreed to meet him. He basically suggested that we crawl on hands and knees back to the DEC, admit we were wrong, and hire him, and he would fix all of our problems. By the way, he was in the same building as DEC on St. George's Terrace in Perth. Since we had not done anything wrong, and because we could not afford to pay him on an ongoing basis, after meeting with him for 40 minutes, we declined his further involvement. His bill was $4,000. In 2009, we discovered that Dr. Johannes Schumby was the convener of EDO, the Environmental Defender's Office. He had never disclosed or even attempted to allude to any such connection. In the license issued to us on the 31st of March 2008, DEC limited our throughput to 6,000 head, effectively half of our built-up capital infrastructure. They did so knowing full well that such a limit would cause our financial demise, as we could not cash flow the investment at such a restriction. During the 18 months it took for our appeal to be heard, decided upon, and implemented, our business, which had proven very viable, was ruined. By the time the clarification on our amended license was received, there were only 6 months remaining on the original 2-year license. Our existing bank was not willing to provide additional funding. No bank was willing to refinance us, and no purchaser was forthcoming at the auction held on the 20th of October 2009 because of the lack of certainty hanging over the license. At one point, when we were operating at 10,000 head and constructing in-house, we had over 20 full-time equivalent employees. Throughout the last year, we had managed to hold on to 8 of our core group of excellent employees, with the intention of building up our business again once a common sense outcome was achieved with the DEC. We were forced to lay off these employees in November 2009. We trucked the last of the cattle 1 month later. After working actively with and encouraging DEC to take action on a new license from October, DEC finally delivered our new license on the 8th of March 2010, knowing that our bank had given us until the 15th of March to give them a solution. The new license was untenable, and the appeal ruling did not deliver any relief. Our operations manager and close personal friend, Lindley Bosley, committed suicide that month. He was well aware of the latest developments. He had taken casual employment since we laid him off, with the idea that he would come back to us when possible. Lindley was a doer, a problem solver, one of those guys that could turn his hand to anything with a smile. He also proved himself to be an amazing people manager, which is very rare, and he knew more about our place than we did. While depression is an elusive animal, and we can never know everything that was going on inside of him, we know that Lindley felt frustrated that he could not solve the problem. He was depressed, seeing all he had engineered and helped to build sitting idle. Despair is a terrible thing. I understand it. It's depressing to have bureaucrats telling us what we can and cannot do when they have never produced anything in this world except more red tape. In attempting to justify their jobs, they keep a good man like Lindley from helping to feed the world. The value in Lindley at every level was too great to quantify. We feel a deep, dark hole in our hearts and minds at the injustice of this situation. We feel compelled to get involved to ensure that this does not happen again, and we will do what we must. Above all, though, we want to produce. That's all we ever wanted to do. Produce, make things, be productive. When we're not allowed to do the only thing we've ever wanted to do, when good problem-solving men like Lindley Bosley are driven to despair because the non-producers triumph over the producers, then we must act. We owe millions of dollars. With the license, our feedlot has value that would pay back those creditors. Without a reasonable license, there is no value. The National Australia Bank appointed receivers in September 2010. We filed a case against the DEC in federal court in October. We're hoping that in the interest of our creditors, NAB and the other very good people who trusted us enough to do business with us, the receivers will allow us to pursue the case before moving in and liquidating assets. The challenge we all face, producers, consumers, elected representatives, is vast. Environmental extremists have infiltrated many good organizations, and our system of governance, which relied upon people's goodness, has been bastardized and taken advantage of. Regulations and policies have advanced without the benefit of a vote, and the bureaucracy is beginning to strangle everything in its path. In a developed society, land use conflict will always exist. Much of the conflict today is being created by governments, though, attempting to manage land belonging to other people. We found out only recently about the so-called conservation corridors in Western Australia and the plan put forward by DEC in 2006 called a 100-year biodiversity conservation strategy for Western Australia. We fear there is a lack of a true understanding of economics and the relationships between progress and the environment. The emotion driving movements such as the biodiversity agenda has led to decisions being made that will have severe detrimental effects on our state and our country in future. We believe decisions about our own situation have been tainted by many of these emotive movements. There are many decent people who have been involved with the formerly good organizations who do not recognize what has been happening, and they're unwittingly promoting an extremist agenda. It is vital that you and other good people see the very real and horrific results of that agenda. That's why we're here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Janet. As Janet said, our personal story, as well as Kate's story, and many, many others, are tragic stories. But for Janet and I, there has at least been some good come of all this. When our story first went viral on the internet, we began to get aid, comfort, and encouragement from people all over Australia, and indeed all over the world. And then we began to hear similar stories from people that lost their life's work, their properties and livelihoods from a complicated myriad of bureaucratic power trips, water conservation notices, heritage listings, license conditions, abuse of Endangered Species Act. The list goes on and on and on. And this loss of property has destroyed a great many people's lives. And it led me to realize that our personal story is only a very small symptom of a much, much larger problem that is beginning to cripple the entire Western world. And this is something that will eventually affect all people in Australia. People in all walks of Australian life, both the public sector and private sector, are drowning in a sea of red tape. Teachers, shopkeepers, transport operators spend more time filling out forms than they do with their students, their clients, or their trucks. They all report suffering from that sickening, humanity-killing feeling that their own government does not trust them to think for themselves, but rather expects them to act like some cog in a machine unthinkingly punching out the next rivet. This is a democratic nation. If none of us can be trusted to manage our own affairs, then who among us can be trusted to manage everyone else's affairs? Unfortunately, today we see that legislation does not come from the people. It is always drafted by government departments and always serves to increase the power and authority of the people that drafted it. It is always very, very lengthy and seldom even read in its entirety by the parliamentarians that are voting on it. The legislation almost always contains so-called Henry VIII clauses, which in effect give departments the power to write their own laws once the initial enabling legislation is passed. We see today that agencies and departments throughout Australia are acting in concert with the agenda and reporting directly to the United Nations. There is a Korean man that lives in New York City that seems to have more power and authority about what actually happens in Australia than our own government does. The people of Australia have never been granted the opportunity to vote for this man, Ban Ki-moon, and they almost certainly wouldn't do so if they were given the opportunity. The Australian nation has a vibrant and successful history, thanks in no small part to adherence to the time-tested and true principles of English common law. The departments, at the request of United Nations Agenda 21, are turning English common law on its head. A basic principle that our ancestors wisely established for us was that individuals had the right to own property and that they were innocent until proven guilty of any allegations against them. Departments, at the request of the United Nations, now make laws and regulations on the basis of the precautionary principle, which is the opposite of the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. The precautionary principle says that government departments are justified in taking any action and restricting any use of land without any proof of wrongdoing of the owner of the land or any evidence whatsoever. This perversion of justice must be stopped, and it's up to us to do it. We've seen various instances all over Australia. We see the northern part of Australia has been decimated by the knee-jerk ban of the live export industry, which is nothing more than punishing the good for the existence of the bad. It is a clear violation of the basic principles of English common law. We have recently passed a dangerous crossroads in Australia with the enactment of 19 dangerous pieces of legislation, the so-called carbon tax. I've read part of that legislation myself. It's very difficult to read, mind you. It's called a bill for an act to encourage the use of clean energy and for other purposes. I can assure all of you here that there's a whole lot more about other purposes in there than there is about clean energy. There's about 11,000 words total in the 19 acts, but I think I can sum them up in about 3 sentences. This is an act that takes the decision-making power over everything that is produced in Australia, who produces it, and how much they get paid for it, out of the hands of consumers and puts it in the hands of a small group of bureaucrats and investment makers. This, despite all evidence of human history that centralized control over economies is a very bad idea. Worse still, this cedes control and authority over what happens in Australia to unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats in the United Nations. The same people that managed the Oil for Food program in Iraq. I thank all of you for coming here today and the politicians that are here. And it's exciting to see this many people interested and willing to start fighting back. And I would urge all of you to continue to communicate both with your politicians and the media. And let them know that in the Westminster system of democracy, if you're an elected politician, it is your basic function and purpose for being to protect the rights and liberties of the citizens of Australia. And let them know that the silent majority has awoken and is beginning to find its voice. And from this day forward, we will judge all parliaments and governments in Australia, not by how many regulations they can enable and how many laws they can pass, but rather by how many laws they can repeal. Thank you.